I took the Panasonic S1II all the way to a tropical island just to see if it would overheat and make this YouTube video. Okay, well, technically it wasn't just to make this video. I'm not Mr. Beast. However, I am a filmmaking beast. And I thought, what better way to further test and put the Panasonic S1II through its paces than some ultimate real-world use shooting an international mini doc with it. This is a sequel to my first in-depth review on the camera, where I discovered many concerning things that were not mentioned at all by your favorite YouTubers, who, ironically themselves, do not like being mentioned. What kind of concerns did I find? Well, for example, in 24 frames per second video modes, the 5-year-old Panasonic S1H arguably provides a nicer image than the S1II. The much hyped ARRI Log C does not turn your S1II into a baby ARRI. It in fact doesn't even look particularly ARRI-like compared to some alternatives. Then there was the HDMI lag, autofocusing issues, and a few other curious quirks that made this camera a lot less perfect than people might be suggesting. That being said, I still went ahead, ignored my own advice, and bought one. And I'll go over whether or not I'm immediately regretting that decision a bit later on. But first, I wanted to talk about my new findings after shooting this doc with it. The good, the bad, and the ugly.
So, this is frozen again. Outputting B-raw. It's frozen. Turned it off. Won't turn off. Totally frozen.
Now, I do want to preface all of this by saying I spent my own hard-earned money on this. So anytime I find a problem with the S1II, my wallet does this. Oh, my mistake. That's not my wallet. That's my son crying for the life he'll never have because I keep spending all our money on cameras. Sorry, son. And I want to clear up a few misconceptions. Firstly, I'm not really part of the Marvel Shillmatic universe. I'm phase 5, where everyone stopped caring, box office grosses are dwindling, and everyone has camera embargo, fake review fatigue. I'm this guy.
Avengers with the Z, there is no copyright.
So if I pick apart something that I think is bad about this camera, I'm not shitting on the camera. I'm just not shilling on the camera either. It's just that maybe, just maybe, you've been suckling at the teat of these Shilltubers so long you forgot what constructive criticism sounds like. And maybe the brands themselves have forgotten what that sounds like too. But it is a vital part of the feedback loop for any product to improve and any viewer to make an informed decision about what they are purchasing. So how do I put this delicately? We need to get you off mother's milk as soon as possible and let the savage filmmaker feed you some solid facts. You're a big boy now. It's time we got you doing big boy things. Let's talk about over-sharpening. The baked-in, over-processing, weird kind of iPhone-y thing that newer Panasonic cameras are experiencing. It's the conspiracy theory that just won't quit.
Panasonic, you don't look right. You're very over-sharpened and cheap-looking, and I find that very ironic for a video-centric camera company that your video is so like over-sharpened. Like that's what everyone loves about cinema cams.
Basically, they introduced phase detect autofocus, but when they did, they also introduced this problem that older cameras like the S1H and S5 did not suffer from. We definitely lost image quality to gain autofocusing quality, and I'm sure some people are happy with that trade-off. Me, I want both. I want
the world, Chico, and everything in it.
Now, some people are more sensitive to this over-sharpening than others. but it was the entire reason I ended up selling my S52X and getting an S1H, just to get away from the iPhoneification of the newer Lumix lineup. I personally don't believe that everyone going on Lumix trips didn't notice this was a thing, but only Ed Prosser, who is constantly making fantastic Panasonic reviews, was willing to really acknowledge and dig into this problem. In my first batch of testing, I wanted to see if this problem really persisted in the S1II, because for me, it was pretty much a deal breaker. What I found is that it seemed the over sharpening had been reduced, but upon further testing,
I lied.
see, this over sharpening is still actually an issue with the S1II. It might be less noticeable, or it might simply be that certain conditions trigger the over sharpening into overdrive. The mistake I made in my previous test was using my supremely hot wife with her silky smooth, radiant skin in soft lighting environments. Her softening combated the over sharpening. Yes,
It was beauty killed the beast.
but as soon as you turn this camera on mere mortals, we see that there is still something concerning going on here. And it starts being very obvious in these more brightly lit, slightly harsher lighting environments. This over sharpening is most noticeable in fine details, but it leads to a condition that I have dubbed anime eyes. The over sharpening specifically around the eyes creates this really weird phenomenon in certain conditions where the opacity of the eye, light bouncing off the eye, and the level of detail in the eye causes the eye itself to start having this weird, exaggerated, well, sort of anime look. Almost like someone has penciled over the top of the actual eye. It renders your subject with this very unnatural look, like something is off, but you can't put your finger on what. Now, you don't have to do too much digging to see Panasonic users while filming on newer Panasonic cameras suffering from anime eyes in their pieces to camera. And if you want to know what generation of Panasonic camera they're using, well,
The eyes, Chico. They never lied.
this becomes more or less noticeable depending on the shooting conditions, but man, does it look weird to me. And I can only assume is a direct result of whatever noise reduction and digital sharpening the Panasonic processor is doing as it handshakes off its improved autofocus. But I personally think it really needs fixing. Sony cameras have a similar problem, but I can't believe I'm going to say this. It's just not as bad. While Sony may look digital sharp, the application of its sharpness seems more uniform, so you don't have certain parts of your image looking aggressively sharp. I mean, it's all sharp, and while this is not something I like, it doesn't give you this weird inconsistency like the S1II or the S52X seems to. Like, it's not just the eyes Panasonic doesn't like, they also seem to have a problem with foliage. Anytime you're trying to have trees and leaves and lots of detailed foresty vistas in focus, it also starts looking very iPhoney. Or should I just say phony, with no eye. And there was a lot of discourse on my previous video about over sharpening and how fixable it is in post-production. In 99% of cases, I'm filming in Vlog with the sharpness and detail settings at their absolute lowest. Ed Prosser also has a great video exploring some of the solutions, and maybe I'll do some side-by-sides exploring them here, but at the end of the day, if you overbake a cake, putting icing on the top won't change the fact you can still taste it's a little bit burnt. And that's kind of how I feel about these post-processing solutions to fix over-processing in camera. I'm sure it can help, but I do not think it can really fix it. So how about we just fix the over-processing up front rather than be forced to try and minimize it in post? I recently used it in a podcast environment, and we have essentially a soft light coming through the window acting as the key. Now, this is in Cine-like V2 to match both cameras, but again, isn't something strange going on here? Yes, we do have anime eyes, but also the detail and over-sharpening make trying to follow that detail as the subject moves while talking kind of unnatural. I'm not sure if it comes across after YouTube compression, but what I see on my monitor doesn't look quite right. And why do I keep banging on about this as it relates to Panasonic Lumix cameras? Because they never used to have this problem. They were the ones that did a softer, more pleasing image than the competition, and they did it brilliantly. Now they've nixed that advantage and selling point. To me, the over-sharpening is really disruptive, but some people will have no issue with it. So look, if you don't mind being an anime girl living in an anime world, please ignore this point entirely. But it does lead to my next finding on set, and that's being the S1II's autofocus. In my first review, I found the autofocus to be subpar, but I thought this could be on account of the third-party lens I was using, or maybe I hadn't set the autofocus settings correctly. Well, on this shoot, I used the newest Lumix 24-60 zoom lens split with the Samyang 35-150. And even when I was using the Lumix lens with further tweaked autofocus settings, I encountered a lot of autofocusing issues. Like, a lot. And I am kind of surprised the narrative around the S1II's autofocus is that it's almost as good as Sony, because I can tell you as a Sony user, it is nowhere near Sony level. If you expect autofocusing capabilities that rival the standard set by Sony, you're going to be very disappointed with this camera. I found the autofocusing average at best. In fact, it made me wonder if it was worse than on my S5IIX, which I don't remember failing as consistently as this camera has. In almost all scenarios, I found the autofocus would fail. With human eye detection, body detection, and continuous tracking mode or area plus mode, I just never got very good results, or at least I never got the kind of reliability I was accustomed to. The autofocus seems to fall apart anytime you have more than one subject in frame. Whenever I put two people in frame, rather than focus on either of them, it would frequently just focus behind them on the background. I mean, both of these people right here have faces and eyes. So how come the S1II ain't detecting them? Now, even when you tapped on your subject, after a while it might lose that subject and go back to the background. When it was focused on a single subject and there was nothing else in shot, occasionally it would still sometimes just start hunting and completely lose them. When I wanted to focus on specific objects, it would lock onto that object, but then if something passed in front of that object, it would start latching onto that instead. If you were in a high contrast scenario where your subject was quite backlit, would also struggle to maintain focus and get that awful micropulsing. In every scenario I used the autofocus would at some point fail and I would lose a shot. For doco work or anything where you want to be in the moment and relying on the autofocus, you can't truly rely on this autofocus. So I'm just wondering how we all came to the conclusion that autofocus was good. Do you say something enough times that becomes true? Is this just based on one person in frame talking to camera? Are all the tests just one person dancing around in front of the camera? Are we all victims of unrealistic YouTuber testing? The autofocus doesn't do well with object detection. It doesn't do well when there are multiple subjects in frame. It doesn't do well with tracking. Tracking features get shut off using certain higher frame rate modes. Even basic one subject in shot tracking is not always 100% reliable. Third-party lenses also hurt the autofocusing capabilities of the S1II. So, given all these issues, is it not just fair to say Panasonic's S1II autofocus is bad? And if we are saying that, should this have perhaps been more of a talking point on its release?
Bueller. 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 Bueller.
He's sick.
And all this hunting and things falling out of focus and focusing on the wrong thing reminded me very much of the old contrast detect autofocus we used to get on Panasonic cameras. The kind of autofocus I originally left Panasonic for in favor of Sony. And all I can say is that I just don't get any of these problems when I'm using my Sonys. I don't even have to specifically select what type of special focusing features I want my camera to accentuate. Autofocus just works like 95% of the time. It doesn't do weird stuff. It doesn't struggle with multiple subjects. It's intuitive. It works well with third-party lenses. Making all adjustments with a tap quickly corrects any problems. I mean, it's just so much better. The two systems are not in the same league at the moment, let alone the same level. Panasonic S1II autofocus was working for me maybe 65% of the time. That is just my experience, okay? Using it in these real world tests. But it's a very noticeable dip in functionality. They're not almost the same. And whoever told you that either never used a new Sony camera, never shot anything outside of one-person in-frame tests, or is, well,
the trusted Shilltubers who have, like, the companies know they're not going to badmouth the camera, so here you go, sir. There you go. Promote, advertise for us. Fly free, tuber shill boy. Whereas me, like, I'm going to be critical.
So if autofocus is something you highly value, and if you're used to Sony's autofocus or Canon's, if that's the bar you hold up as the standard, I really don't think switching to Panasonic is viable right now. They just still have a long way to go. Battery life on the new S1II is also definitely not as good as previous cameras. While you could confidently rely on the S1H or the S1IIX battery lasting a solid 2 hours of real-world shooting, it looks like all the extra functions and features and frame rates wrapped up in the S1II mean it drains batteries faster. Now, I know a lot of people have done tests that suggest a single battery lasts about an hour 40. In my experience, I found that the batteries were more like, I don't know, 1 hour and 15 minute-ish before you needed to think about swapping. So for me personally, I feel like we've gone from a really good battery life to kind of meh battery life. And this is not that much better than Blackmagic offerings, especially with a few things plugged into the camera like radio or shotgun mics. As far as trade-offs go, I feel like this is not amazing considering how good Lumix used to be in this regard. I see a lot of 1 step forward, 2 steps back with this camera when you kind of add everything up. But look, it's not all bad. Stabilization using the 24-60 lens and doing a mini dock, which was essentially 99% handheld, really gave me a chance to see just how good the Panasonic stabilization was. And first of all, there can be no argument. It is absolutely the best stabilization of any mirrorless camera I've used. Absolutely smokes Sony's offerings and Canon's. And the new cropless IBIS mode is a fantastic new feature when using Lumix lenses. So overall, this was something I was super impressed with. But I will say that using this type of IBIS is almost too good. Like, it does create a very stable shot, yes, but it also seems a little unnatural. In fact, the best way to describe it is if you were filming on a tripod, but that tripod was on a boat out at sea. You get this sort of very gentle side-to-side rocking motion in a lot of your shots. So it doesn't feel exactly like handheld is meant to feel, but look, it is still awesome to have. And over-sharpening issues aside, if we just park that for a second, the image quality itself, the color science coming out of this camera is lovely. Vlog is a great log profile to work with in post, much better than Sony S-Log 3. And I think if you're just doing direct conversions to Rec 709, you can also see Panasonic tweaking their color science most of the time in favorable ways. And I feel like Panasonic colors are moving incrementally closer to Blackmagic colors with each new camera. And I'm here for it because Blackmagic themselves do kind of offer an RE light look to their image, which is always pretty stunning. I utilized the low light second base ISO to shoot some pre-dawn sunrise shots, and a lot of this theater show was also shot in high ISO values. And in most situations, a second base ISO of 5000 is actually better than Sony's base ISO of 12800. And while I'm not really a slow motion guy, I did enjoy having slow motion options without the more dramatic 1.5 times crop modes that we used to have to deal with. I also shot a few shots in B-raw, and I was reminded once again of how well they've implemented B-raw into this camera. In fact, it would be my #1 reason for owning this camera, with the option to shoot 6K open gate B-raw or 60 frames per second slow motion 17:9 B-raw. I mean, it really does add an extra dimension to this camera that nothing else on the market currently quite comes close to. And to give a little bit of context to my purchase, as someone who does a fair bit of doc work, the ability to scale up the image quality to the raw modes of this camera and then scale back down to the regular modes is something that is like hugely advantageous. Generally, PTC interviews will be lit and in controlled environments. You don't need to film those in RAW to get a great look, and you can't afford to drop a terabyte per interview every day on these smaller projects. But conversely, filming B-roll in tough conditions means the raw shooting modes come into their own and you can kind of get the best of both worlds. This is a problem the current Blackmagic cameras need to solve. It's not always viable to shoot in B-raw. They need a compressed codec in addition to B-raw to make them like versatile doc cams, which they would otherwise be perfect for, and I'll talk about that more in another video. But once again, the S1II kind of falls in the sweet spot of offering the additional functionality and flexibility of B-raw and H.264 codecs for smaller versatile doc work. I also found that the new false color feature to be perfect for quick exposure checks while filming. False color needs to be built into all cameras going forward. It's just so useful. I would use it all the time to check my exposure levels and make subtle tweaks that I otherwise couldn't if I was simply eyeballing my frame. It is so cool that Panasonic have included this, and while a lot of monitors offer false color, I think having it in camera with the Panasonic is probably going to give you something at least slightly more accurate, as it's configured specifically for the S1II's camera exposure settings. Another new feature which is absolutely excellent is their hybrid zoom function. Turning on this mode will increase your zoom range for any zoom lens you use and allow you to continue zooming into essentially the camera's APS-C mode. But this isn't like a jump. The zoom extension gets applied to your lens automatically, so you can just simply zoom past the original focal range. That makes, say, the 24-60 a 24-90 zoom, which is incredibly useful. And this is a super smart design and one that basically enhances any zoom lens you might be using. And because it's a 6K sensor, you're not going to notice a dip in quality if you turn this mode on and zoom to the end of that zoom range. It just basically makes all your zoom lenses better. So if you purchase this camera, you're kind of upgrading your lens set for free at the same time. And for me, that's a big plus. For this trip, I used the Blackmagic 5-inch 12G monitor, and I turned off the HDMI audio out except when recording B-raw directly to it. And this did significantly improve the HDMI lag that I was experiencing when using my small HD Cine 7 monitor. The only problem I encountered is the red recording frame was so close to the edge of the Blackmagic monitor, you couldn't easily confirm that you were in recording mode. And now the million-dollar question: did I experience any overheating on a tropical island? Well, the short answer is no, but I was careful. I did not record in open gate. I only recorded in the 4K modes and primarily at 24 frames per second. I recorded mainly to an SD card, not the CF card, and I was only filming continuously for about 20 minutes at any given stretch. And while yes, I was filming on a tropical island, it was wintertime on that island, meaning the temperature was only around 77 degrees Fahrenheit. However, I did have many people commenting on my previous review discussing being forced to return their Panasonic S1IIs due to overheating problems. You can't discount these users' experience, and I do think concerns around the reliability persist with this camera. While I did not have the camera overheat, I did have it completely shut off on me mid-interview, corrupting that section of the interview I recorded. Now, I'm not sure exactly why this happened, but I'm speculating it was because I was using a third-party battery in the camera, and these third-party batteries have been reported to cause issues with the Panasonic cameras. So we can give Panasonic the benefit of the doubt. But the second more concerning issue I had while recording externally to B-raw is that the camera completely froze up. The monitor would freeze, the camera itself would freeze, turning the camera on and off would not work, and the only way to reset the camera at this point was to pop the battery out. And the fact that this happened twice when I was only recording B-raw for one short block of filming is something that I think is very concerning. Both times, fortunately, I was not recording anything super important, but what if I was? And look, overall, we can simply say the number one problem with this camera is that it's somewhat buggy and unreliable. And that is the thing that we used to give shit to Blackmagic about all the time. And what most professionals value above features and shooting modes is reliability and stability. Sony may be boring as balls, but I never had that lock up on me when I was recording ProRes RAW externally. And in fact, I never had it drop power mid-recording with a third-party battery either. I never had it miss autofocus so dramatically so often. Using the S1II as my go-to corporate shooting camera is already making me nervous because there's so many ways it could fail in the field. Will it just overheat one day in the middle of a shoot? Will it lose focus on my subject when I'm not monitoring it and looking at my other camera? There's a few too many what-ifs going on here that make me very apprehensive. The fact that the autofocus is so much worse than Sony cameras is already going to make my shoot days unnecessarily difficult. So why did I get the S1II? And do I regret it? Well, maybe a little, but I'm trying to make peace with it. Ultimately, having tested the camera and see it underperform and still buying it anyway might seem kind of stupid. But much like Trump, I might seem stupid, but really, I'm playing 4D chess.
This is a different panel than I've had. Everything's computer. That's beautiful, wow.
I had been looking for a Sony exit strategy for years, but nothing tops Sony for reliability and ease of use in the corporate world. It's also a highly requested brand by clients. The S1II doesn't change that, but what it might offer is a bridge back to my all-time favorite cameras, Blackmagic cameras, because Blackmagic now use L-mount glass. Filling out my collection of L-mount lenses makes a lot of sense while we patiently wait for a Blackmagic camera that offers its own reliable autofocus. We've seen that potential with the new firmware update to the 6K full-frame camera. I'm sure we'll soon see it in the Pixis models, getting autofocus upgrades as well. How far away are we from Blackmagic providing reliable autofocus along with cinema quality visuals? In my head, it might only be a year or even less. And when that time comes, it will be game, set, match. So with this pivot, I'm happy to start building up my lens selections for the S1II for when that Blackmagic option is available in the future, and then for my S1II to become the B camera to that Blackmagic camera. So I suppose I look at this choice as a slight detour to a greater camera goal rather than the end-game camera system. And look, the truth is Sony is slipping. Their cameras are kind of boring to use. From their clinical image, orange horror color science, to their bland shooting options, they're not really innovating anymore, whereas before they were the innovators. Now they're just slowly falling behind the curve. And even as a slave to the corporate shooting world, in my soul beats the heart of an artist. I want my camera to allow me the most opportunity to bring innovation and creativity to whatever I'm working on. The S1II and the Lumix philosophy align a lot more with that desire than Sony cameras do. Even if they didn't quite get it right with this camera, the intent was there. Shoot for the moon, Panasonic. If you miss, you'll only end up occasionally overheating, I hope. My final thoughts on this camera are complicated. I still can't recommend this camera despite being an owner, but I do like a lot of things about it, so I wouldn't be mad if you went against my own better judgment, just like I did. The S1II is so frustrating because it's got all these new features, but it can't really honestly produce a better image than the S1H from 5 years ago. And if they'd simply made it the size of the S1H, it would also probably have solved all these overheating problems. And if this is meant to be the successor to the S1H, shouldn't those two things be top priority for Lumix when making this thing? A better image and no overheating? Instead of giving us about 8 different variations of 60 frames per second slow motion mode, some of which might break the camera if you use them? I mean, I just don't think you should make new cameras which are less well designed than your old cameras. Well, I guess you can, but somebody has to point it out, right? Right?
Anyone? 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 Did it work? Anyone? Anyone know the effects? Anyone know what this is? Class? Anyone? Anyone? Anyone seen this before?
If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like and Shillscribe. And you can use my affiliate links, watch my films. Or you know what? Just maybe go outside, get some fresh air, feel the sun on your face. Don't let me catch you gear scrolling for the rest of the day. Get out there, get after it, change the world, make something of yourself, young man. Or just leave a comment. As always, I am the Savage Filmmaker, the Panasonic S1II filmmaker, and I'll see you when I see you.
You're not good. You just know how to hide, how to lie. Me, I don't have that problem. Me, I always tell the truth, even when I lie.